Today we will hear a very short scene setter from each of our three speakers, and then we get a chance to quiz them on what they believe needs to be done to challenge the status quo. First up, we've got Verity Morgan-Schmidt, Coordinator of the Rural Futures Taskforce, CEO of Farmers for Climate Action, and a fourth-generation farm girl from the Western Australian wheat belt. We'll hear from Jim McDonald, who farms on the Liverpool Plains. He's a member of the CSIRO Land and Water Flagship Advisory Committee and has a long history in natural resource management. And also David Mailer. He was part of the installation successfully of Australia's first privately funded award-winning solar farm and an active farmer who believes renewables provide significant business opportunities for regional Australia. Please welcome them all up to the panel.
Thank you, Karen, for that introduction. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge everyone in the room and say thank you to all of you for welcoming us along today to be able to talk about this report and also some of the bigger challenges facing agriculture, which are very, very close to our hearts as farmers, long-time farmers. So I'd also like to acknowledge the contributors to the task force who are unable to be here with us today. Dr. Amanda Cahill of The Next Economy, who is our lead author, and of course our farmers from as far away as Western Australia, who played a lead role in contributing their thoughts, their expertise and their passion into this area. Now, we're going to take you on a little bit of a journey today. I'll start with the big picture, the global challenges, the global context in which we as an agricultural community are operating. Jim will drill down into the local, and Dave gets the fun job of wrapping up with some of the solutions and opportunities that are available to us. So bear with us through the doom and gloom. You've got that to look forward to. So first, the big picture. As we are all probably very well aware, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their special report on limiting warming to 1.5 degrees on the 8th of October 2018. The report was compiled by over 91 lead authors representing many countries around the world and built on the back of over 6,000 peer-reviewed articles. Now that is quite some paper. The report demonstrated some key points which are particularly pertinent for Australian agriculture. The first, since pre-industrial times, human activity has already warmed the world by approximately 1 degree. At the current rate of warming, we'll hit 1.5 between 2030 and 2052. And to put that into context, I have 3 children under the age of 7, so they are going to still be very young by the time we actually hit those hard limits. Agriculture, as we all know, and as we are witnessing out in the bush today with 100% of New South Wales, we've just come under that, in drought, agriculture is on the front line of these climate impacts. Reduced yields, increasing frequency and severity of droughts, heat stress, changing frost risks, and the list goes on. Now, just to demonstrate some of that, I'll skip that one. So Australian ag, in particular, is already really, really struggling. Jim will talk a little bit more about some of the specifics that he's experiencing in a moment. The other point to note is that critically, the report demonstrates that within the laws of physics and chemistry, it is possible to limit our warming to 1.5 degrees. What we need now is the political will to make it happen. We still have a chance to act, and every half of degree of warming will result in increasing hardships, declining yields, and cumulative challenges for our rural industries. Governments, including our own, have been given the message, and it's now over to them to decide how to act. Now, I'm going to paraphrase from one of Australia's leading academics in this space and one of the contributors to the IPCC reports. Gosh, sorry, can you forgive me? I've had a cold. So one of the things that we know is that at this point in time, every choice that we make matters. Every half a degree matters. And every year that we fail to take action matters. So just to give you an example, oops, it is moving there, it's just not moving here. There we go. So this will give you an idea of, in a little bit of a humorous way, our current trajectory. Right now we are that little red car heading along the very, very scary line. Where we need to get to is this black line that goes down here. Unfortunately, we're not exactly where we need to be in order to achieve that outcome. Okay, so. Right, now, sorry, bear with me. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what the Rural Futures Taskforce is all about. It's about identifying how the choices that we make can actually alter the trajectory that we are currently on. This slide demonstrates where Australia is currently heading. And one point that I will stress at this moment in time is that the IPCC report tells us that the current commitments that we have made, current commitments that we as governments around the world have made, will actually be insufficient to limit our warming. And yet what this demonstrates is that right now, we're actually not even on target to achieve those insufficient objectives. So just pause for a moment and digest that. Okay, while I gather, where did I get to? Okay, all right. Now, after a decade of policy paralysis, Australia currently has no climate policy, no energy policy, and although we'll wait to see what happens today, still no drought policy. And not only that, but by sticking our heads in the sand, we are actually denying ourselves of opportunities. And I'm really glad that this is actually being recorded because my father is a die-hard cricket fan and I certainly am not. So I'm hoping to send this over to him. So this is Dennis Lilly heading down the pitch. Dennis Lilly in this instance is Australian agriculture, and he is lining up and he has all of the skill and all of the capacity in the world. What he's also facing is a series of potholes in the pitch, and that is what we are facing as a rural sector. We have ambition, we have expertise, but we face unprecedented challenges. Climate change, conflicting land use, declining yields, all of these are significant challenges that we as a sector are currently facing. We're Dennis Lilly with a series of potholes in front of us. So that is why we have pulled this report together. We've come together as farmers from Bunteen, from Queensland, from Ku-ring-gai, to start saying, well, how do we overcome these challenges? How do we identify a way to actually make regional Australia far more resilient to the impacts that we are already experiencing? And that is a challenge that all of us need to take on board. So I think the point to finish on before I hand over to Jim is, why should all of this matter to you as rural communicators, as leaders in your field who are constantly out there championing and engaging with agriculture in the most constructive possible way? The reason that it matters is that this is your future too. If we fail to address our trajectory, if we continue to be Dennis but with potholes in the way, then we will continue to send balls down the pitch that go off course. The time is now for us to be standing up for our collective future, to take agriculture forward, to overcome these challenges and to embrace the opportunities, including those outlined in the Rural Futures Taskforce report. So to drill down into a more local level, I'll hand over now to Jim. Thank you.
Thanks, Verity. And thank you very much for this opportunity to have us hopefully not preach at you, but talk to you. Last week I had an op-ed published in the Murdoch Press, and it was as it was something I've never done before. I wanted to see what others thought of it, and so I scrolled through the comments, and I know it's dangerous if I wanted to keep my ego intact. But I also knew that there would be a diverse range of views and reasons behind their comments. But there was one theme that really stuck with me, and that was that where I farm on the Liverpool Plains, and I'm paraphrasing here, was too far out for agriculture. All right, they did warn me, and I was sort of sitting there wondering where does a comment like that come from? Don't they have a map? Don't they read the land? The Liverpool Plains has had, and I use had reservedly, the three main ingredients for the secure and sustainable production of food and fibre. First, we've got deep, highly fertile, and high moisture holding capacity soils. Next, we have access to clean, available and plentiful groundwater supplies. And most importantly, we have a climate that allows us to grow the greatest variety of plants in both summer and winter, and most of the time with only rain. There is no doubt that these attributes are Australia's greatest agricultural assets, and wherever they occur in that combination, they must be protected, as they don't occur regularly in the Australian landscape. I said a minute ago that we had these three attributes, but our climate is now changing quite rapidly. And these 4 slides tell me as a farmer all I need to know when looking at my current production systems, and we must continue to assess our ability to maintain a business as the climate changes, particularly in the face of more severe weather extremes and as their reoccurrence shortens. I would have shown you the slides that tell me as a farmer what I need. Essentially Australia is having a southward progression of the subtropical ridge, and all this can be verified on the BOM website if you need to know some of the details. But there is an increasing density or number of highs that affect our climate. And we know that high pressure systems are associated with warm daytime temperatures and cool overnight temperature. Verity's already mentioned frost and a few other things, and an increase in their occurrence generally indicates clearer conditions and reduced rainfall. I would have shown you a map that shows how our climates have moved 300 to 400 kilometres south in the last 20 years. So the climate that we experience now used to be the climate that Toowoomba got. The climate that we used to have is now further south than Dubbo. And there are physical phenomena that are driving these changes caused by the increasing global heat stores. And I would have shown you too, and I'll look at the numbers so I can read some numbers. We get, being a cotton grower, we get very vital and fantastic information from cottonseed distributors. In the last 2 years, last 2 summers, from the 1st of October to the 20th of October to the 20th of April, the number of days that we've had above 35 degrees at home we've had a 333% increase. So we've gone from an average of 20 to over 60. We've also had an 800% increase in days over 40, gone from an average of 1 to 10. So they're significant figures for us when we're trying to grow crops in our environment. They're also, and look, unfortunately, sorry, I can't go into the detail of the agronomic impacts that we have, that we're experiencing, but I'm sure many of you have probably written about it and you've seen it documented elsewhere. Our rural and regional communities will also have to confront the same issues that agricultural businesses will have to. They too will need to become more resilient, and you'll hear more about this word all the time, to the impacts of these events. Resilience is the ability to cope with change and to keep functioning in much the same kind of way. One of the fundamental concepts of resilience I relate to the three-legged seat analogy. Keeping the 3 legs is fundamental to keeping it functioning as a seat. If the seat cannot be made resilient from threats to its current purpose, for example by somebody treating for white ants or looking for rot, or keeping the 2-year-old and saws away, it changes its function, possibly to firewood. Obviously some actions can be repaired and threats are reversible, but the seat burning with the rest of the house is irreversible. We have faced threats to keeping the Liverpool Plains as we know. 2 of the seat legs have faced threats, but by treating the historical overuse of groundwater and learning how to maintain soil structure and the importance of nutrient replenishment, we have made ourselves more resilient to the 3rd leg, climate, or historical climate that is, which I suppose we always thought of as variable but immutable. By not considering that the climate has changed forever, and unless we undertake actions to stop it changing, the 3 attributes that now makes the Liverpool Plains what it is will have changed. Resilience is not just a buzzword for you're on your own, get on with it, but it requires a set of properties we have learnt from the natural systems we operate in. Our report asks that these properties are built into our future planning and actions, particularly as we must begin to overlay all of our agricultural, climate, energy and climate policies with programs with climate disruption. Transformational change is coming, either in the way we deal with these matters or in the way they deal with us. The report seeks to make sure we maintain a high degree. There you go. There's a climate we used to experience further north. We used to make sure we maintain a high degree of diversity, especially response diversity. Our economic basis has a relative modular structure that does not over-connect its components. System 101. Importantly, this is important while we take our scope beyond agriculture to other services we can build on, such as value adding and increasing the provision of health and aged care services in the region. We need to build a strong capacity to respond quickly to change. We must allow significant openness, allowing emigration and immigration of all components. We focus on the maintenance of adequate reserves. We encourage innovation and creativity. We build high social capital, particularly trust, leadership and social networks. And we move to a more adaptive governance model that is flexible, distributive and learning based. The current adoption of these properties range. Some are actively encouraged, others cannot be found in the linear, optimised silo processes and institutions we currently use, and some just jar against an economic rationalist view. We have a lot to learn from natural systems and how they make themselves resilient to shocks. I hope our report sparks a deeper conversation about the paths to take, other than the ones currently on offer. Thank you.
I think my wife married me because I can lift heavy things, and I got to say, I'm an introvert at heart, and this task actually fills me with some dread, standing up in front of people and telling a story. It is said that there are two types of people in the world, the chickens and the pigs. Chickens are engaged with the process, the pigs are committed sacrifices to the process. At the moment I feel very much like a pig. It is back to the future for regional Australia, and we can, I believe, should have a distributed renewable generators. There was in the past the local county council networks that managed the local electricity generation and distribution. The shift to centralised generation suited the states and the large fossil fuel generators that chose to build close to the supply of coal. Wind and solar generation are an opportunity for regional Australia not only to drought-proof the farm, but also to develop competitive advantage for light industry in our regional towns. How did I come to where I am? I blame a sense that something wasn't right with regional sustainability, economic efficiency and the growth model. From a background in large grain production at Gundawindi, I started to question our farming future. A bit of a midlife crisis led me to a career shift to livestock, motorbikes, Kokoda, the Australian Rural Leadership Program, and eventually university. I was at a loose end running a small grazing property at Uralla. In early 2017, I was asked if I could build a solar farm. I said I'll have a go. How hard can it be? My father had a site at Boggabilla, my brother had a plan, they had a few regional investors, my business partner Methuen here, was keen, and it turned out if we brought a lifetime of agricultural experience to bear, we could indeed build a solar farm. Our construction method means that we can deliver high quality installations faster, more cheaply than anyone else in the industry. The electric peg system that we use is effectively reducing the build times from years to weeks, while maintaining the highest levels of quality standards. Not bad for a couple of middle-aged farmers who simply want to leave the world in a better place for our children. The average cost of building solar in Australia is now at approximately $1.40 a watt. The first project at Boggabilla we built was $1.05 a watt. The technology in the renewable sector is moving quickly, and the Morelli engineering procurement instalment cost of building solar is now under $1 a watt. The Finkel review demonstrated that levelised cost of electricity generation was already in favour of wind and solar, meaning that wind and solar are cheaper than the traditional coal and gas-fired generation and much cheaper than the new heli generation technology. The reality is that if Australia is going to ensure an affordable, reliable supply that will meet demand, it will come from the renewable sector. The two farms we have built at Chillamurra and Dunblane, they are large-scale solar farms at the smaller end of the megawatt range, 4.8 megawatts and 11 megawatts DC. They are the largest of their type in the world, privately funded without government grants. They operate commercially as freely competitive generators on the network with a projected return on investment of between 8 and 12%. Chillamurra and Dunblane alone can power over 6,000 homes. At the start, Menzion and I were determined to manage a social values-based enterprise, ensuring local communities were engaged with our projects. To that end, we partnered with Backtrack in Armidale to provide career pathways for local youth. We also partnered with Withers Consulting to provide mentoring for our younger local staff. The underlying vision is to be respected and valued by our community, the communities we work in. The agricultural wealth of this nation is built alongside rich renewable sources in wind and solar, and it occurs to me that wind and solar projects are known as farms for a good reason. In agriculture, we convert sun and rain and soil into food and fibre energy. The renewable sector is harvesting wind and sun for another type of energy, electricity. The business community is leading the energy revolution. The jury has concluded that renewables are the future for affordable, reliable and dispatchable energy. This is an opportunity to reconfigure the light industry and reboot the value-add sectors of regional Australia. It is up to us to determine what the next generation's opportunities are going to look like. Technology is changing rapidly, and my company, Morelli Projects, is already talking to a range of customers that are looking to position their businesses for that competitive advantage. Business as usual in regional Australia is a spiral downwards. Right now, we're at a crossroads. If in Australia we want a resilient, sustainable regional community, we will need an important mental shift, accepting that we are in fact an agrarian society, reliant on regional Australia for a large portion of our national wealth. There needs to be holistic systems thinking if we're going to ensure we rebuild social, economic and environmental capital. Addressing the needs of the national energy market is one of those crossroads opportunities that is tailor-made for regional Australia to seize as an opportunity. There is a synergy that the renewables industry has with agriculture that plays out on numerous levels. It has a role in reducing emissions that mitigate the threats of climate change, the ability to work 365 days a year and a bonus day on the leap years. Renewables can produce essential energy while cutting costs, and as an added bonus, deliver passive income that allows farmers to do what they do best, look after the land. The lack of steady federal and state policy is undermining domestic capacity and driving prices up. What Morelli Solar has demonstrated is that solutions are available. Smaller, large-scale solar is viable, and that a distributed network is possible, which will both boost network affordability, reliability and sustainability. Jim and Verity have laid out the challenges. It is my pleasure to share some of those available solutions. The choices we make are in our hands. This is a story. This is part of the story for the Rural Futures Taskforce report. Thank you.
Terrific. So it's now time for questions. If you can just follow our usual protocols of introduce yourself when you're called, keep the questions brief, and no speeches unless you're up on the podium. Yeah.
How do we manage land use conflict to deal with some of the issues you identified? And Dave made a point around farms becoming solar farms because it's still growing something, still producing something. How do we deal with those conflicts in rural areas? People saying they don't want these things on neighbouring their property. But similarly, how do we deal with people who live in the cities thinking they should have control over how our land is managed beyond the range?
It's a great question, thank you, Robert. And it's certainly one, we take the ethos that if you're not at the table, you're generally on the menu. And that's why we actively engage in a lot of these conversations I'll reflect on the environmental space and link that back to vegetation management in particular. So slightly different, but it's still that same ethos. So one of the things that we try to do is to actually really constructively engage and recognise, we are a farmer organisation first and foremost. We're not an environmental organisation first and foremost. Our focus is on agriculture. So what we try to do is to really position farmers and support farmers who are already doing a fantastic job being land custodians and assisting them to actually navigate those conflicting land use or even perspectives on how that land use should be navigated. So conflicting land use can mean so many things. So in New South Wales, I know around Bathurst, you've had some issues with the solar farm there. And, in that case, really, we've got to make sure that these things are rolled out in a way that actually reflects the values and the priorities of rural communities. Up in Queensland and indeed in the Liverpool Plains, we have conflicting land use in terms of fossil fuel extraction, which threatens to completely undermine the viability of these regional areas. So it's about supporting farmers to actually have their voices heard on these critical issues, working with state farming organisations, which we do right across the country, and their membership, which is often our membership as well, to really put farmers on the front foot in being able to tackle these issues and to really have the upper hand as much as possible in navigating these spaces. And I do absolutely hear you, Robert. Quite often you'll get a message out of urban Australia proclaiming that they know how the land should be managed. Our perspective is that farmers frankly are the key land custodians in this country and that farmers need to play a critical role in all of these decision-making processes.
Just before I hand to Dave, I was going to say, Robert, the quickest way is to give them the option, the wind farm or the coal mine.
I got a slightly different take on Jim's take. I think one of the problems that we do face here is that we have a tendency in the renewable sector to have multinationals come in and foist very large projects, very expensive national and state significant projects onto our communities. And one of the things I think that we don't do well is engage with our communities in these projects. What we've been able to demonstrate through what we're doing with Morelli projects is that we're not large projects. We've already got a distributed network out there that can sustain very small-scale large generators across the whole distribution network. We don't have to have a gigawatt of solar panels put up or 150 wind turbines put up to actually be sustainable and meet our demand for energy into this renewable space. So I think that we need to take a different approach to how we engage our community and how we share that engagement around the community so that they actually feel part of it, the process, not excluded from the process. I think to a degree the wind sector has done a lot better job in the recent time than the solar industry is doing. The wind sector was forced into engaging with the communities that they were trying to actually build within in a process that made the communities feel inclusive, and we need to work through that process if we're going to build a renewable sector.
Tony?
Tony Ayres, rounding up a corporate advisory business here in Sydney. David just answered my question that I was going to pose to Verity around if I live in Collie or I live in Gunnedah and I live in rural communities where there are extractive industries for fossil fuels, personal opinions, my own personal opinions on whether that's good or bad aside, they are creating jobs and creating wealth. And I think the trick is to make every post a winner in terms of regional development. And I guess my question to all of you, and David picked up on it, it's about community engagement, whether you're a coal mining company or a solar company or whatever. No speeches. My question is the Canadian example. where it does seem to be that Canada does a better job of farmers and the mining industry working together to truly develop rural and regional Canada. And I'd just be interested in your comments around how we can actually do both, because I think in a practical sense, mutually exclusive events is not going to benefit anybody.
I suppose I can start with that, with my experience in the Namoi, when particularly coal mining started to come into the region. This would be the mid-2000s. We sat down as a community, we undertook a lot of technical studies trying to understand if you can have one coal mine, how many coal mines can you have before it does start to have an impact on the regional water tables or the regional landscape processes. So, we took quite a pragmatic view. We know that we knew they were coming. Is there a line you can draw in the sand that protects both sides of the debate? We spent a lot of time trying to understand how you would understand cumulative impacts in a risk assessment process. We went to, eventually Tony Windsor got this through the water trigger at the federal level, got $70 million to run a bioregional assessments right across the major coal mining regions in Australia. They are called bioregional assessments. I think 2 have been released out of the 8 or so. That there is some serious technical, intellectual grunt behind trying to understand those risks. They've stalled the bioregional assessments. So essentially the community is still out there seeking, is there a way we can technically understand the risks to us? And is there a way that they can understand their risks to us as well? Politics plays a game in all of this. The community's been shut out of this, and it moves up a couple of levels. And we've tried consistently over the last 15 years to engage the companies. The companies, the first movers into the Namoi were supportive because they were first movers. They knew in the end that others that followed may not be so conducive to sort of a welcome as the early ones. But essentially it's just died. So your sort of question about, how do you do it? We've tried to do it in a pragmatic, as technical as possible in a risk assessment process, and we're not getting very far at the moment.
Tony, firstly, thank you for your question. And really, you've hit the nail on the head of the genesis of this report that we're talking about today. It was about what kind of future do we want? What kind of jobs will need to be created? The science is telling us that we need to have a transition beyond extractive industries. That's the robust science at a global level at the moment. So how do we do that in a way that really embraces these communities that are going to be at the epicentre of that? And it's certainly a topic that's very close to my heart. My husband's actually in mining, of all industries. So it's one that we engage with as an organisation and go, well, what does a fair and equitable transition actually look like? What are the growth industries of the future? How does Australia's demographics and the changing global markets reflect that, so that we're actually able to embrace and capitalise on these communities, so that Collie, Gunnedah, Emerald, none of these places actually get left behind, because we know that there has been a variety of industries that have driven the economics of these regions. How do we strengthen and diversify these regional economies? And that's what we're trying to start a conversation about with this report, so that they really do have a thriving future, regardless of when we start to decarbonise the economy. We want these communities to be strong well into the future, not just dependent on any one particular income stream.
One of the struggles that agriculture has is that agriculture, I believe, tends to take a long-term view, generational view of what it's about. And it's in conflict with the economic policy, and certainly the economic policy that's been developed over the last 30 or 40 years, which is redacted down to economic efficiency. Agriculture looks at a social, economic and environmental footprint over a long period of time, and so it comes into conflict with industries that that are looking at a purely economic driver. What can be produced today? And when I reflect on what's currently happening with some of the large-scale projects in my industry, it reminds me of the boom and bust cycles of the mining industry, and particularly the coal seam gas industry into Queensland, Chinchilla, Miles, who had this huge boom for a couple of years, and now they've settled into a huge hangover. The social sustainability, the social capital of those towns is disappearing. And so we've got to be very careful and very considered in how we actually engage with these communities, because most of these communities, regional communities, are actually looking for a longer term view, a generational view, and they're not well suited to our economic climate, our policy drivers in that economic climate. Our competition policy says that we redact it all down to price efficiency, but that's not what farmers are about. Farmers are about generational stewardship, and we need to actually start to develop a strategy around how we engage these communities at their level that actually makes them part of the process, but also protects that long-term sustainability, viability and resilience in our communities. Because just remember, and it's been pointed out, agriculture is the major driving force in national wealth. You strip away the rubbish around GDP, you look at national wealth, agriculture drives that. Agriculture on the farm and indirectly employs 2.5 million people in this country. It is the economic driver of this country, and so we've got to start to look after it.
Could I just also add, Tony, sorry, we don't excuse agriculture from participating in building its own future as well. So, we need to step up if we're going to start just taking the same mentality as what a lot of other extractive industries have, which is just put it on a ship and let it go. We need to change that mentality, and we need to try and bring a lot of that value adding back into the regions and do it ourselves.
Question up the back.
Jennifer Brown, COP Australia. I'm curious to hear if, from the panel, you think there's a risk of reaching peak solar farms. In other words, the amount of supply that we need.
The reality is that technology is changing so rapidly. Where I started 18 months ago, nearly 2 years ago, the technology has changed so rapidly. The capacity and the changing storage market, so the battery technology or the storage technology that's coming through is changing so rapidly. The price drivers in terms of solar panels, we've seen a nearly 14% drop in price for solar panels this year. We're driving towards a ratio, DC to AC ratios, that allow for storage development application down the track of 1 to 1.8 AC to DC ratios, which allows significant clipping and significant capacity for storage, and that's still the levelised cost of energy allows for that. So I see that we've got plenty of opportunity to develop renewables further, because I think that, and I believe the cost of storage and the types of storage that are going to be available to us are going to come to us very shortly. We've already seen the Tesla battery in South Australia have a significant impact on not only driving down costs but stabilising the network in South Australia. So storage will provide some solutions, it'll supply some opportunities, but it also means that the fickle nature of solar and wind will be actually evened out. And so we can see where dispatchability is going to be the stabiliser within the market.
Just very quickly, Jen, I'll just point back to, I think you might have been in a meeting with us with Professor Ken Baldwin presenting, he's the director of the Energy Change Institute at the Australian National University, and one of Australia's leading experts in this energy transition. And I think, one of the key things that came out for me is that one of the biggest risks to our energy reliability, which is where I assume the question is actually coming from, is the lack of energy policy. So it's not that we've got renewable energy coming online, it's not that we've had a RET, it's not any of those issues, it's actually the fact that for the last decade we have had backflips, we have had ideological warfare, and we've landed ourselves in a situation where in 2018 we've thrown out the Finkel Review, we've thrown out the Clean Energy Target, we've thrown out the NEG, and we still have no energy policy. And that is our biggest risk for the affordability, the reliability and the sustainability of the energy sector. And that definitely feeds back into the costs that farmers, as end users, are feeling.
And one last question.
Justin Alec. I work for Climate Friendly. We're one of Australia's largest carbon farming project developers. So I've read through the Rural Futures Taskforce report. It's a very fine report. There's no mention of a price on carbon in it. My question to the panel is, do you feel that a price on carbon is a necessary precondition to the transformation of the agricultural sector?
I was hoping someone would ask this one. So I think the reality is that a price on carbon is certainly the most efficient method of actually driving this transition and making carbon farming an economically appealing option for Australian farmers. The price that farmers are currently paid for projects under the ERF means that most small farmers who don't have the capacity to aggregate or go into savanna burning style projects simply can't engage. It isn't cost effective, isn't worthwhile. It also means that at the other end of the spectrum, not only are we denying farmers the opportunities to engage in that carbon market in a constructive fashion, the other end of the spectrum, we're also not dealing with the emissions profiles because we've got no clear policy in place. The reality is that right now in the current political context, it's not actually on the table. So we work with what is on the table and we look at what sort of policies we can actually support and develop to be able to move forward on this and to, as I've said before, to break past that ideological dilemma which has thrown us into this situation. So certainly the leading experts tell us that it is actually the most efficient way to do it. It's not the option that Australia has gone down, which brings us back to where we are right now in 2018 with none of these policies in place and prices going through the roof as a result.
I'd have a simple answer, yes. And I feel once you've made that decision, the details follow. At the moment, we seem to be working at the details before trying to understand where we need to get to.
I think rather than pricing carbon, so give ourselves the option. We've gone down the track of taxing, rather than taxing, incentivising. And so we've got this opportunity to move forward into a bright new and rosy future where we can have clean generating technology. One of the issues that I think we face in the rhetoric and the lack of policy is that agriculture is one of those industries that doesn't have any room to move here. We are locked into a cycle of a carbon cycle that we cannot actually mitigate very easily and clearly. And so we need to actually understand that transport's the same, and we're a heavily dependent industry on transport. So we need to actually understand what incentivises a carbon market rather than what taxes a carbon market. And so I think that's a strategy that we need to work through. I do agree that at some point in time we need to actually to understand and price carbon.
Thank you very much to our panel. If everyone can please give them a round of applause.
Hi everyone. What an excellent few presentations we've had this afternoon. Before I get into thanking the speakers, and I'm kind of unused to doing this with the camera in front of me and no auto cue between me and the camera, but there you go. Firstly, thanks to Farm Riders and thanks to the outgoing committee members and all the best, and thank you for the new committee members for stepping up. We all, I'm sure, really value this forum every month, and it's a great thing that you do, and we really appreciate it. I had the opportunity beforehand to discuss with Verity, and we're in furious agreement about the root cause of the hostility to climate science or climate action that to combat atmospheric warming that's common, I think, breaking down in the ag sector. And we agreed that it's largely to do with the aggressive, blame-driven way that the case was pursued. You might call it, and Verity did, the ideological warfare in those early stages, which I think sort of set up something of a defensive response by farmers who consider themselves to be amongst those who are being blamed. But it is an issue that fundamentally should unite farmers and should include farmers in and should receive support from farmers, because obviously emissions are waste, and farmers are those who are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So if emissions are waste, then lower emissions, all other things being equal, should be more profitable. So pursuing lower emission farming simply makes good business sense. Why is that such a dreadful thing? Thank you to our three speakers. Verity noted the lack of political will, and I think that's a really important thing. And that includes, of course, a price or pricing on carbon. And she noted that every choice that we make matters. Jim, I really appreciated how he drew our attention to the fact that climate change is happening. And I was glad, actually, that we were stuck on that slide for a bit with those regions that showed how much productivity was projected to decrease over the next 20 or so years because of climate change. Because I grew up on the edge of one of those orange regions that Dubbo was right on the edge of that orange region, and I grew up on a farm between Dubbo and Narromine, which, if that map is right, is going to be something like 10% less productive because of climate change over the years. And for David, thank you too for your presentation. It was inspiring to see a farmer jumping in, boots and all, to the business opportunities presented by renewable energy. So let's show our appreciation to our panel, and thank you so much.